Welcome to the Remembering a Life podcast. I'm your host, Holly Ignatowski. Today we're talking with Shannon Donnick, Senior Manager of Loss and Healing Programs for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. We're going to spend a bit of time talking about suicide loss and how we can find support after the death of a loved one. We're recording this episode shortly before International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, which is November 19th. Always held the Saturday before Thanksgiving every year, this day was designated by Congress as a day for those affected by suicide to come together for healing and support. Welcome, Shannon. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
People who work in support of a particular cause are often drawn to that cause because they have a personal connection to it. Would you be willing to share a little bit about how you became involved in working in the suicide prevention space?
Sure. You're right. Many of the people here at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention have a personal connection. And for myself, I lost my grandma to suicide when I was 13. And it was, being so young, I actually didn't really get involved with the cause immediately. I was still, still a kid. I still had to get into high school and everything that comes with that. But certainly it was always something in the back of my mind. And for me, the catalyst was actually, I'm originally from Wisconsin myself, and for a period of time, I was doing some political fundraising work, and I was working with, this is many, many years ago, but I used to work for the Lieutenant Governor of Wisconsin at the time, Barbara Lawton, and one of her passions was mental health and mental health parity in the state of Wisconsin, and all of a sudden, just being kind of in that environment and, speaking with a lot of therapists and professionals, it just kind of like started to stir up for me just things that I was thinking about how I would love to, to kind of give back, and made me think about my own experience and my family's loss. And so eventually my husband and I ended up moving to New York City, and that's really when I was ready to make a career change and wanted to get into this work that really just kind of like spoke to me. And that's, again, that's kind of like so many that are involved with the cause here, in particular here at AFSP. People are so passionate about this because we all, do have that personal experience to draw from of, wanting to make connections with others, remembering how, confusing or isolating it felt in those early days to lose a loved one to suicide, and just wanting to be able to be there for someone else so that we can do what we can to just provide that comfort and that understanding.
Can you talk about the work and the mission of AFSP, the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention?
Yes, it's an incredible organization. Truly, I've been here for almost 7 years now, and we're really, working towards bringing hope and support to those who have been impacted by suicide in some way. So there's so many different aspects. I could probably just spend time talking about everything that AFSP does for quite some time, but it's both in research, in prevention, and then in providing support for those who have lost a loved one to suicide. And that's the area that I work in and I'm most comfortable with, is just, again, being able to be there for someone after a loss, because it honestly can be very, very confusing. Sometimes for someone who lost someone to suicide, it might have been the first time that they've really ever even heard the word suicide, so they don't know where to turn to find support. And so I'm really the most passionate about the loss side of things, but love to see, just as we have grown. I mean, again, like I mentioned, I've been here for about 7 years, so in that time, I've actually seen the reach of American Foundation for Suicide Prevention grow so much. We're nationwide, and it really is exciting to see that. Certainly the organization predates me. It's been around for about 35 years now, so really has been at the forefront of suicide prevention and supporting suicide loss survivors from the beginning.
Let's talk about your role with AFSP, and how does the Loss and Healing team help others to move forward after a loss?
Yeah, that's a great question. And really, again, I should have even just kind of pulled this into AFSP's greater mission statement, which is really to save lives and bring hope to those who have been affected by suicide. And so that's what we hope to do, is actually provide some hope for those. So we always think of how, someone loses a loved one to suicide and immediately, nowadays, I think we all just sort of turn to our computers right away to start a search for anything that we do. And so losing a loved one to suicide is very similar. They'll hop, someone might just hop onto Google and start trying to find resources or support. So we're here and hope that they can find their way to us right away, where what I do here is I really focus on leading our Healing Conversations program, which I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit. It's our peer support program. And so we kind of see that as the ideal initial connection for a suicide loss survivor. But we also, on our website, we actually have a support group locator, which is another really helpful, step one for a loss survivor, to be able to put in their zip code and search to find the nearest support group to their home, so that they could actually see that there's others like them, that they'd be able to go visit a room, walk into a room, be welcomed by others who have experienced a loss in the same way, and to really help them feel that they're not alone. Also, I'll just give a quick plug for that, since the pandemic, a lot of support groups have actually moved onto virtual and online platforms. So it actually has been, now that we're kind of in this quasi world of some things coming back in person and some things staying online, it actually has, increased the supports available to a suicide loss survivor, because there actually are quite a few support groups that have opened up their doors to people from outside of their immediate location. So those who maybe weren't able to travel to an in-person meeting, or maybe there wasn't one nearby, they now have options virtually to connect with people, which is really great. And so then too, I know another program that we focus on in loss and healing is our International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. And so again, it's just, we really are trying to create these environments for loss survivors to come together, feel less alone, see that there are others who are peers who can at least, be able to we talk about being able to get it, right? That's something that a loss survivor is looking for. Does someone get this, what I'm carrying now, what I've experienced? And we hope to provide those environments for them to come together.
Grief is so overwhelming for anyone who's experienced any kind of a loss. But grief following the death of someone to suicide can be particularly complex. Why is that?
Mm-hmm. I think that's really one piece that is so confusing to those who haven't experienced a suicide loss, or even for those who are, going through it for the first time, because in many ways, grief after a suicide can resemble grief after, any kind of loss, especially if that death was very sudden or traumatic. Of course, we're all, anytime we lose someone, we're all going to be, feeling those same, intense sadness or yearning for our loved one, regardless. But suicide-related grief can be, it's often, like you just mentioned, it's often associated with greater emotional pain, profound distress. What we see that comes with suicide that makes it unique is that there's intense feelings of guilt. There's often this perceived responsibility, like the thought that if I had known, I should have done more. There's one of the trainers that we work with often in our work here. He calls it the tyranny of hindsight. And we often are just kind of left with this anger, or even like an odd sense of relief sometimes for someone. A lot of emotions pop up related to suicide that we don't expect, that are totally different from other loss. And that overwhelming why question is another thing that comes up for suicide loss that is unique. And so it really is, because especially for someone who maybe has already experienced loss of a different kind and is maybe familiar with the feelings of grief that come from losing a loved one, to then experience suicide loss and realize that it's so different. It can really be confusing as to what's going on here. Why am I feeling all of this? Thoughts of suicide can even pop up in a suicide loss survivor just because we're, thinking about our loved one, and it really kind of opens that door that is so scary sometimes. And so not knowing where to turn with all of these emotions, with all of these thoughts, and feeling feeling alienated from others, from feeling like this is so different and so unique, and being worried about being able to talk about this, safely and privately with other friends or coworkers. All of this kind of contributes to why the experience of losing a loved one to suicide is so much more complex, and why we feel that it really is helpful to create these environments where suicide loss survivors can connect with others who've been there, who can say, who can understand that. Again, these are peer programs that we run here at AFSP, so they're not run by professionals, but that's where it really is like two people sitting down together and sharing their stories of loss, and just feeling that isolation is going away because this person understands, a lot of those same, because they had those same feelings, they had those same questions.
So often we hear people say, "Oh, suicide is so selfish. They were only thinking of themselves. They made this choice." How do you respond to that? And that can't be helpful to someone who's going through this loss.
It's so right. That is something that comes up a lot, and it's things like that seems to make suicide loss survivors want to come together. Before coming to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, I actually worked in a similar local organization here in New York City, where I was a support group facilitator, and pretty much every meeting we would have a moment where the floor would be open for people to just share things like that, just the remarks that would come from others that, it comes from a place of just confusion, right? Confusion, curiosity. I think so often someone loses someone to suicide, and people want to be helpful and want to provide support and care, but really end up sometimes saying the most hurtful things because it's coming from a place of just not knowing more. Like so many people just don't know much about suicide and much about suicide prevention, and certainly what, the things that we're learning here in this environment. So no, those, unfortunately, people often put their feet in their mouth and can say things that are truly hurtful to suicide loss survivors. And so that's almost why we create these environments so that they can try to trust that here it's safe. We're not going to pass judgments. We know that what leads someone to suicide is such a complex road as well. There's no one aspect or one event that, leads to someone taking their life. And so we're just, we're not going to even get into that. We want to be here to support that loss survivor and to hear stories about their loved one. Who were they? There was so much more for their life, that they had so much going on, and there were so many things that made their personality more than how it is that their life ended. So, we're here to support, but we're also here to just reminisce together too.
So, Shannon, how can we do that? How can we better support others who've experienced this loss with perhaps more appropriate language?
Honestly, we really just want to be there for the suicide loss survivor in whatever would be helpful to them. So sometimes, honestly, just reaching out. If you know of a friend or family member who experienced a suicide loss, just checking in on them and making sure that they know that you're there, that you're eager to support, you're eager to help. Saying their name, that's something that we all talk about a lot. Sometimes people, because we know that sometimes we can say the wrong thing, we'll be so afraid to say anything that we actually, the absence of anything is almost more hurtful to the suicide loss survivor. So, they would, being able to just have an environment where they might be able to say their loved one's name, let them know that we're thinking of them, and we're, letting them know that we're also thinking of the loved one, right? If that was a person that we happen to know too, if we're remembering them or thinking of them, or a memory came up, sharing that with the loss survivor, they'll be eager to hear it. They're thinking too of their loved one, especially in those early days. It's just pretty much constant. Someone recently was just mentioning to me something that was very helpful to her immediately after her loss was a friend who actually just didn't even ask what she needed, just knew that there were things that were probably slipping through the cracks because there was so much going on. You just experienced this loss. You're letting family members know, you're having to spread that word. You're planning the logistics of a memorial service. There's so much going on. And so to just have someone just drop off some food, maybe even just send some groceries over to their home, just the little things to let them know that you're thinking of them. And also, it's almost you're not even adding to their plate of asking them what you could do, but you're just thinking ahead and thinking, you know what, this is what I think would be helpful to me right now. I can imagine groceries are being forgotten right now, right? So let me just send something over to just try to alleviate.
Earlier, you mentioned a program called Healing Conversations that matches up recent loss survivors with volunteers who've experienced a similar kind of loss as we were talking about. How does somebody get involved with this, either as a volunteer or someone who needs support?
Yeah, that's great. Healing Conversations is the thing I'm most passionate about. That's the program that I lead at the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And so the best way to learn a little bit more is probably to go to our website, afsp.org/healing conversations. We'll take you to our webpage, and you're right, it's our peer-based, volunteer-driven support program. So at this point, we have volunteers all across the country who all have lost a loved one to suicide. We really see pretty much every loss type at this point represented within our community. So anything from having lost a parent or a child, a spouse, a sibling, but also we see a lot of requests more and more coming in for people who lost a friend, lost a coworker, lost a cousin, maybe a teacher who lost a student. And we do have those relationships represented within our community as well, which I'm really excited to see those kind of requests coming in, just because sometimes it can be for those slightly further removed relationships, it can be really difficult to find places of support because it might not be quite the same close-knit network that you might see for some of for those family relationships. Sometimes people really don't know where to turn with some of those other relationships. So I'm so glad when they find their way here because I know that we can put them in touch with someone. So like I mentioned, I think at the beginning, is we really do see Healing Conversations as a sort of a natural first step for a loss survivor, just because this is going to create a one-on-one conversation between the loss survivor and a volunteer, which feels a little bit safer for someone who, especially for those who may be, new to the, sort of talk support. If someone hasn't done therapy before, this can be very scary to open up to a stranger to talk about something so personal and something that's not talked about all the time. It can be really intimidating. And so something that I think is great about Healing Conversations is that it can be a great place for just to ask questions about, okay, well, after, what do I do? If I am thinking about going to a support group, what does that even look like? Because, if this one-on-one conversation might be a little intimidating, certainly walking into a group of a room full of strangers could be really scary. So it's helpful for our volunteer to be able to answer those questions and help them kind of picture what it might be like to take those next steps, or, certainly to consider looking at therapy, looking at speaking with a mental health professional. That's very scary sometimes too. So it's nice for our volunteer to be there to provide that emotional support, provide a safe place where they can talk about all of those questions and all of those thoughts and all of those emotions that they're feeling, but then also, answer some of these questions of just, honestly, what do I do next? Really the best way to kind of get that started is to, like I mentioned, come to our website, and you'll see where you can either email sort of our Healing Conversations coordinators, which is our volunteer lead at each of our chapters. You can either email them, or you can go ahead and fill out our form right away, which is going to just kind of gather some of the unique information about your experience, your loss, so that we can take that information and find someone who's a very similar match. That's always our goal here, is to try to match you up with someone whose experience was pretty similar. So we do our best to match up similar loss types, similar age, anything else that's if you are feeling as something was very unique to your circumstance or to your situation. For example, if your faith background is very important to you, it might be helpful for you to indicate that to us so that we can connect you with a volunteer who shares the same faith background. Likewise, for people who are interested in volunteering, certainly this can really bring a great call to purpose, and a really kind of feel like this can be part of the grieving process for those of us to give back, right? So again, I would encourage anyone who is interested to just come back to our website. We're actually the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention is a chapter-based organization. So while I'm at the national office in New York City, we also have local chapters in all of our states. So it's a good way to, probably the best way to start the volunteer process would be to connect with your local chapter and find out, how you can get involved with and meet with your area director, who's our field staff person, and our Healing Conversations coordinator, who's that volunteer lead. And yeah, it's such a great environment that we can trust that we can make those matches for people and kind of get you started on your grief journey. One thing I did want to mention too is that for anyone who might be listening to this and is, a few years removed from their loss, maybe they experienced a suicide loss, 5 years or 10 years ago, and they never had an opportunity to speak with a Healing Conversations volunteer, or maybe they're thinking, I never even looked into support groups. I don't want them to feel that they can't come to us, because we're definitely here for anyone at any point in their grief journey who would be eager to speak with a volunteer. It doesn't have to be. It's not a specific time frame. We just, like I said at the beginning, because there are so many questions, we do think this could be really helpful for those newer losses, but we're definitely here for everyone.
And the hope is that talking through these conversations and to others who've experienced something similar is to help them move forward in their grief journey, as you said, no matter where you are in that journey, right?
Absolutely. That's where we really see such positive connection. I mean, sometimes it just, I'm speaking personally because this is for me not just about loss, but almost kind of every experience that I have. Sometimes it's just helpful to know that someone else feels it. So that's one thing that we try to make sure that people are aware of. Like, we don't have the answers. We can sit together and hypothesize and ask, the same questions. Why did this happen? How did this happen? We won't have those answers, but there is comfort in knowing that someone else is feeling that, so really just being able to be with someone who, I keep coming back to that phrase because we say it a lot. Someone who gets it, who we hear so often from loss survivors that they feel that they kind of have to cover this up, that they have to hide this because they might feel, with work, they kind of have to they're expected to just get right back to it. Kind of many people might put upon them that they expect to have been over it, you should be quote unquote over this loss by now. And so folks want them to get back to work or just kind of get on with their life. And so they'll feel like they don't have anywhere else to go, with this emotion that they're still feeling. So to be able to sit down with one of our volunteers and just say, this is really hard for me. I'm still, I'm very angry, or I'm so sad. And for our volunteer to say, yes, it was like that for me too. That is really can be just such a comfort to know, okay, the things I'm feeling are quote unquote normal, and I'm not alone in it. To know that other people are feeling this, have seen this, and again, to kind of look at what are, we really want to encourage people to try any supports available, because, you really don't know what is going to be that piece that really feels like this is the thing that's really kind of helping me. And it might be a combination. So we encourage, have the healing conversation and try the support group. Look into therapy. Definitely speaking to a professional is going to be very different than these peer conversations that I've been talking about. Look into our Survivor Day events. And two, we also on our website, we have a list of books that we recommend. We also have several films that we recommend. We have a number of documentaries that AFSP has created for the loss survivor experience. So just really kind of tapping into all of that can help that person feel less alone, and that's really what's going to kind of help to push them along to moving forward, of course at their own pace. But that's what that's the beauty of having these multiple avenues to look at to see, okay, there are definitely differences for all of us in our grief journeys, but there's some similarities that it can just feel helpful to know, like, I'm not alone in this, and these people stepped in these steps before, and I can step in those steps as well.
You mentioned International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, and we talked about it in the intro. Can you talk about those events? Where do people learn about them? Where are they held? And how do they get involved?
Thank you for bringing me back to that, because that's coming up quick. Our International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day is a really special day. It's a day, as the title implies, just for suicide loss survivors. So again, I'd point people to our website for more information. It's afsp.org/Survivor Day. And so, like I said, it's coming up this year. It's on November 19th. It's always the Saturday before American Thanksgiving. And again, you'll be at that website, at the Survivor Day website, you'll be able to learn a little bit more about the day, and you'll be able to navigate to find an event near you, because like I said, we're a chapter-based organization, so you'll be able to look at where is there an event being held in your area. But also, we, and this is again kind of like one of those unique circumstances, like I mentioned with the support groups, where because of so many things going virtual after COVID immediately, there's a lot that's actually staying virtual, and we've seen that that's very helpful for folks. So there will be in-person options for many, but there's also the opportunity to maybe for those who aren't quite ready to go to an event in person, there's opportunity to log in online and to connect with either with your local chapter virtually, or we also host at AFSP.org, we'll host a Survivor Day Live, which is, again, just a really nice way for loss survivors to be able to tune in and see that their experience reflected by others. And so if you do go to an event, you'll be able to meet other loss survivors. It'll be a different environment, though, than a support group, and so that's why Survivor Day is so special. It's we really are trying to create a path of hope forward, and that's why each aspect is a little bit unique, and I do think each has its benefits because, like we mentioned, healing conversations is that one-on-one environment, so, really gives full space to the loss survivor to talk through anything that needs to come up, any questions, any memories that they really want to share with someone, any questions they have, anything that just really urgently needs to come through. They can have the full time to do so. But then a support group, you might not have that full time because there might be 20 other people in the room, and so there needs to be space for each person to share a little bit. But you'll really see so many different people and experiences that are similar to yours, which can be really healing. But now, on to International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, it's going to be a little different because it's going to be with that element of hope and that hope for growth moving forward into the future. So you're connecting with others, but in a different way. And like I mentioned, we have documentaries that feature suicide loss survivors, and I think at this point we have 5 different films in our library. And so each of these events will actually feature one of those films. So it'll be a really nice way to bring loss survivors together, to introduce each other, welcome each other, get to know each other, but then be able to experience a film together and then a discussion afterwards, which is really wonderful.
And although you focus on the loss side, you and your colleagues are also very dedicated to preventing suicide. Can you just tell us briefly about the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline?
Yes, I can share very briefly. Just like I mentioned, I'm really focused on our loss programs, but the 988 has been really wonderful to watch that come together. And AFSP was really moving forward and doing what it could to help move that forward, which was really exciting to be a part of. And so that's another thing that definitely looks different in each state. It's just really exciting to see that now, that really shows that we are all taking mental health seriously, in that now you can dial 988 when you are feeling, you or a loved one or a friend, someone that you care about is experiencing a mental health crisis, just the same way that you would dial 911 if you were experiencing, some sort of physical crisis. So it's really exciting to see that by dialing 988, you'll be connected with a counselor on a hotline, and there's been so much thoughtful work put into making sure that those calls are answered, that there's being plugged into a full network, and so truly we really see that as like being, truly being at the front lines, and to kind of, to really create this priority that's needed surrounding mental health.
That is so important. Shannon, I ask all my guests, and I'm going to ask you too, who are you remembering today?
I love that question. As I was thinking about just coming onto this podcast, and I was actually thinking about today. I'm remembering a friend, a very good friend of mine from high school. His name was John, who did die by suicide a few years after high school, and he was someone so important to me, and I care very deeply for him still. So he's certainly someone that is in my own loss survivor experience, but I'm specifically remembering him today because I do talk a lot about losing my grandma to suicide, but I don't always remember to mention John, who was also just so very dear to me. So I appreciate the opportunity to just vocalize my thoughts and my memories about him today.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Thank you for joining me, for creating awareness about this very important topic and helping us to understand this very complex grief journey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for drawing attention to it. I was so honored to be here with you. What a lovely conversation with you today.
If you are having thoughts of suicide, a mental health professional can help. If you're currently in a state of distress, call 988. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline provides 24/7 free and confidential support for people in distress, prevention and crisis resources for you or your loved one. To learn more about the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention and International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day, visit afsp.org. To read more about suicide loss, visit the Remembering a Life blog at rememberingalife.com/blog.